And if you're new to the group, this is the Oregon Film and Northwest Film Center's weekly film and new media Zoom happy hour. And many of you probably are looking at this tiny screen and saying, hello, 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 and knowing each other. But just in case, the goal is to create a community and connection with partners that make up our community. And that's filmmakers, artists, nonprofit folks, key funders, and people that might even not self-delineate as filmmakers. So everyone's welcome. And Tim Williams, my incredible co-host, we are so happy to do this every week together. We've been working really closely, also for those of you who don't know, with December Carson. She's the one with the gorgeous background. The sun is setting somewhere out on the beach. So she's also joining us, and a number of our board members are also on the call. So just so you know, there's a whole community of folks that are putting this together. And for the first 6 weeks, I was laughing with somebody earlier today that it felt like a therapy session, and now it feels like we're moving forward and progressing into what are we going to do and how are we going to come together to make changes and to go to the next phase. So with some of your feedback in mind, we're kind of looking to plan 6 weeks out. So we continue, if you all have ideas about who you want to hear from, what you want to hear from, and we'll share that starting next week. We also are kind of doing a mix of folks that are right here in Portland, and also folks that are right here in Portland kind of looking outwards, that work either kind of nationally or internationally or globally. And I think that's important for us to stay connected as a community here, but also certainly to know what's going on in the rest of the world. Last but not least, this is being recorded. And I have to say, at first we were really all doing it like trading cards to friends of like, hey, have you checked this out? But it's kind of getting a life of its own because it's now included in the Portland Art Museum and Northwest Film Center's communications. So it's actually going out to 130,000 people a week. So just to put that in perspective, we want to make sure that we're also sharing this information and the resources outward. So yay for all of that. And I'm super excited because Patty Brebner and David Kress are joining us today, and Tim will really lead the conversation on this front. But they're awesome, and they're spending their next hour with us, maybe with a drink, maybe not, I'm not sure. But we're thrilled. And for those of you who don't know Patty, she's the director of Wieden and Kennedy Studios and Joint. And David is a television and film producer extraordinaire. You all may have heard of Shrill in Portlandia, but there's oh so much more. But we just thank both of you for taking some time to be with us. And it's a super casual conversation. As usual, we'll talk the first 20, 25 minutes to the two of you, and then the chat board's always on. And we'll just open up the conversation after that, and we'll either Tim or I will moderate all those questions that I see popping up. So thank you all for being here.
I had no idea that I was supposed to take over, Amy. Thank you.
Well, you know what? You don't have to. You don't have to. I mean, I have a shiny spaceship for a disco ball, so I'm happy to
pass it along. It's totally fine. Thank you, everybody, for being here once again. I think this is great. I totally agree with Amy that this has started out as sort of a nice sort of therapy session for all of us. And now it's actually, I start to see productive work on these things. And this one especially, I've had so many people come back to me and say, sorry, my dog is right next to me panting, and she's 130 pounds, so she pants very loudly. I've had lots of people come up to me and say, oh, we should do this on this call, and we should do that on, and I got this out of that call. So make sure you check the chat, because there's usually links coming up in the chat, and cut and paste those as you need them. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's really great. And so I think what we should do is just move right on to both Patty and David. And I think Patty, David, the first thing really is give us, Patty, you can go first, and then David second. Tell us who you are, what you're doing, where you are from. And then what we'll do is, I think what I want to do is just take the conversation into how we see this, the next steps of things coming back to shoot, from the small commercial shoots or the small branded shoots all the way up to things like Shrill Season 3. What are the steps we're talking about? What are the things we need to keep in mind as filmmakers, both on the very small sets and up to the larger sets? That feels like the sort of thing that probably is going to be relevant to people, but also something you guys can bring a really good perspective to. So Patty, why don't you kick us off with who you are, what you're up to, and where things are right now?
So my name is Patty Brebner, and as Amy said, I'm director of Wieden and Kennedy Studios, which is essentially Wieden's content studios. So a development and production studio. We also have, as part of that, a post-production arm called Joint, which is editorial, visual effects, CG, animation, audio, kind of full soup to nuts, anything editorial and post-production.
Nice. And David?
Yeah, I guess I'm a homegrown producer in Portland, and I started in advertising and music video, which what was here to do at the time, and gradually evolved into where I am now, which is television, mostly a line producer. In between that, I did some feature film work for Gus, which started as music video work for Gus that led into a low budget feature, and then more music video work and more film work with him. And then I did a indie short with Carrie Brownstein. And so when Carrie and Fred cooked up their TV show, she called me to help with that. And that's how I learned about television. And I've been kind of doing television ever since. So.
I love that you just say Gus like we're supposed to get. It's Gus Van Zandt. Just for those who don't know, I think we all do, but just Gus Van Zandt. Let's start by saying, what are you seeing right now? Like, are you seeing, Patty, from a Wieden and Kennedy point of view, are you seeing things being made, and are they being remade remotely, and what kind of brands are doing that work, and what kind of shoots are you seeing? And then David, sort of add into that if you're seeing anything like that starting to happen on the television side.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We are full steam ahead, very busy. It mostly started with, and I would say, I have to kind of like disclaim, I'm not at liberty to discuss the client's work specifically by name, but we work with, big Fortune 500 companies, Nike, Coke, Facebook, KFC, P&G, Old Spice. I mean, and they're all, in various stages of production. So I can talk specifics, but I won't be able to attach them to a brand just because of confidentiality. But that said, immediately, there was a lot of work. Of course, in advertising, it's all about the Olympics, Final Four, March Madness. There was a lot of work that we had been spending, years in development on in various stages of production that was immediately halted. That really kind of took the wind out of everyone who had been working so hard on this, because it was no longer, relevant, or we were trying to repurpose it, imagining what would come next or what would be up next. And then many clients, and we're lucky, we work with amazing clients who only want, very authentic brand messaging. They don't want to put something out for the sake of putting it out. They're also very respectful of their consumers. They don't want to confuse what priorities and what is important. But everybody was trying to think of how to support their consumers, I guess. What I would say is like the COVID response. So we immediately went through all manner of production for things that are more, what I would say, firm, like a traditional TV ad buy, or things that are more disposable or immediate reactive. So anything going on digital or social. Excuse me. And initially, that was mostly found footage, things that already existed, or type. One thing that we did do quickly for a pro bono project for the state of Oregon that ended up being used in, I've lost track of how many states, but many states around the country, was the governor's PSA to stay home. So that is something that, like, soup to nuts with, all the social deliverables as well, was concepted and delivered probably within a few days. And that was all done remotely. We had a team, we did a lot of this, a lot of Zooms, in preparation for all of this. We had worked, well, I'm backing up a little bit, because we work with Fortune 500 companies, we have to provide business continuity, which shows a plan for maintaining business in a disaster. I have worked on business continuity plans for years. I never foresaw a pandemic disaster. I thought it would be more like an earthquake or volcano. So we had already a substantial investment in infrastructure and tech to be able to move pretty quickly. So at leadership level within my company, we had talked about, this is coming, should we shut down? And then we made the call. And so within 48 hours, everyone was able to work remotely. So picking back up, it made it very easy for the teams. You know, we have Slack channels, and a project kicks off, we do regular check-ins. We've got cloud-based storage. We're working with a lot of tools in post-production and in live action production. Two of our favorites now are Evercast and Frame.io, for the nerds out there. And then we also use things like YouTube channels for on-set supervision, or any kind of like remote supervision of a production. So that was how we mobilized initially. And then as we realized that this was going to be a longer term situation, we did start doing more branded work involving live action or like image acquisition. And how we went, we've done this for a couple of clients. And how we went about that was we cast in traditional, well, not traditional ways, but we did like basically kind of real people or quasi-professional casting. We did it on a global level. We had, we put together tip sheets on how to self-record with an iPhone, or we also we targeted some people that we knew were DPs, filmmakers that met the criteria of what we were looking for, so that it was all safe. So far, I have to think about this. I don't think we've been in a situation where we've actually done drop kits, where we've shipped gear to people from a rental house that is sterile. We've mostly worked with people that have their own internal like setup or gear. And then, you know, we bring that stuff back, it goes into post-production, and we go from there. So that's kind of, I guess, the top line of how we've been addressing it. And it keeps going. There are still, you know, many things that are happening. And then I should add too, there are some, a few longer form pieces that we're running writers' rooms on, and that's, you know, that's a very easy thing to do remotely.
Yeah, and that's a good segue, David, because one of the things I know you've been dealing with is this idea of what series television is going to want or need, you know, from the studio side, as also from the actors side, and also how remote production is going to play into that. And we obviously saw, you know, the Parks and Rec, you know, people get together last night on Zoom, and we had the Goonies get together the week before on Zoom, and there's a lot of Zoom stuff on it. Are you getting any sense, David, of how series, small and large, do they just want to come back with whatever it is? Or are you seeing real-time changes on how things are being approached in that level?
Yeah, it's very much a moving target still. There is some production work going on, mostly using the kind of summer camp model where the entire on-set crew and cast goes into a hotel, quarantines, has very little contact with, you know, third-party people outside of their core crew. But I think even that is really the exception and not the norm. I think the bigger studios and networks are all dealing with much larger issues like relationships they have with unions and guild, and what their safety requirements are for their members, liability, insurance issues. So right now it's pretty much in a holding pattern for most big work. Some work is being done because it's self-referencing the pandemic. So it gives the viewers a reason to understand why the show looks a whole lot different than it has looked in the past. Like the late night shows are on, and some other Axios, the news magazine is on. But again, I think in some cases they're even widening the frame so you understand what they're dealing with in terms of how they're trying to get you the material. So I think our advertising, branding, and indie friends will probably show us more the way than we'll show them in this situation, just because those institutions are so entrenched and so big and so powerful.
Yeah, it's interesting. You can sort of, you see the dichotomy. You know, you see George opening up, and not everybody's coming back. You have why am I blanking on his name? Who has his studio that he's opened up, and he's going to bring his crew in and do everything down there. Tyler Perry. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot. And then you have the tiny things. I'm going to put this link in the chat here, which is basically something that was done here that we actually messaged out a little while ago, called the Homebound Ranger, which was Chad Parker, who went out and did, you know, sort of an 8-person shoot. And he actually documented how he did it. And to your point, David, this idea that some of these smaller branded content things, smaller units that can keep the social distancing, that aren't using many locations, that aren't using many actors, that aren't doing anything with intimate scenes or things like that, are definitely going to be the guinea pigs in this process to show us how these things are, which is why, Patty, I wanted to start off with sort of where you were. And now sort of the question is, where does this go from a sort of short form branded content point of view?
Well, we're slowly leveling up the sophistication. So, you know, what I described initially I mean, you know, but I hadn't really thought about it until now. What started off as like within, you know, 72 hours of, let's see, what was, I think in my world, the tipping point was Tom Hanks. That feels like when shit started getting real, you know, everyone's like, oh my God, Tom Hanks, whoa, and like canceling the Final Four. So like within, you know, 72 hours to a week of that, it was like all type and animation and very simple animation, or like stills, you know, a couple of like non-licensed things that didn't need to be licensed stills. Then it moved into, okay, what can we put together by like leveraging the network of DPs and filmmakers that fit the criteria within their house and have gear and, you know, can follow a brief and will work remotely. Well, now we're putting a toe in, running some very, very small, like stop motion sets or sets that would have talent. And a lot like, you know, very, very limited like touch and contact and direction, very simple execution. It's not super challenging. These aren't complex. The story, well, the creators would kill me if they could hear me say that. The stories aren't super complex. They're complex stories, but there are ways to execute the story that you don't need to have like a 20-person set or like a lot of interaction, period piece, costuming and wardrobing. So, you know, that's this week. And then also looking forward to how to gather resources to be able to have a very controlled private or, you know, or whether it's privately, it's going to have to probably be privately owned, and a plan and a protocol to be able to run a safe set that is producing a lot more sophisticated content like David is used to. And things like, you know, looking at a COVID health supervisor, you know, like that's a new role on set.
And that's where I sort of feel like we are at the moment, is we're stuck between this people trying to finish content they may have had previously that they need to do under a new environment, and people coming up with new content that's going to work in this new environment and how they're trying to do it. And I see a lot of things in the sort of medium to large level that are we're so prepped and ready to grow. And David, you were halfway through production on Chad with this. And so now you have to sort of take this thing that you were producing in a different world and now finish it in a different world completely. And at the same time, I'm seeing content. Yesterday, Jenji Cohen came out with a, you know, sort of thing that she's creating, a sort of COVID thing that's coming out. And Jenji created Orange is the New Black, amongst many, many other things. So there definitely is new content being created under the auspices of where we are, but there's also this pressure to finish the stuff that may have been there at the same time. And I think that's a really tough place to be, I would imagine, David. And I imagine juggling right now in your world, things like Chad, which was shooting, and things like Shrill, which may be coming back to shoot. That's got to be a tough position to be in.
Yeah, I mean, it's all new territory that people are figuring out. I mean, maybe the silver lining for the streamers is that that some of that back catalog is getting used up a little bit.
It's so true.
The one thing about peak TV is that, unlike, you know, a season of network TV, when you're making a new show, you're not just competing with that season's shows. When you're competing on Netflix, you're competing with every show streaming on Netflix that's ever been. So that's a back catalog of many, many years, many, many seasons, right? So I don't think, I think there's enough interest in coming back safely, and there's enough very powerful institutions, the Directors Guild of America, SAG-AFTRA, the Talent Union. They're gonna make sure that when we do come back, that their members are safe. And I think there's a little more flexibility if you're making a television commercial. I mean, Patty, I'd be interested to see if you're hearing from any guild or union members if there are limitations on what they'll allow you to do. We know for us in long form entertainment that there are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. There was a project just completed and had a lot of conversations with DGA. It's Wild West because there wasn't a set, like the director wasn't on set. The director wasn't, there was no, you couldn't even have an AD. And they get that. They were actually really great. But I could see very confused. So yeah, I think it's going to be about, since every day is so different. I mean, even in what one learns about how to run a safe set, like for example, could you have an antibody test? Well, if you have an antibody test, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have COVID, or, you know, so, and like, is 14 days enough of a quarantine? I mean, there are still so many unknowns that I do feel like, if your intention, my experience, you know, so far has been all of those people, SAG-AFTRA, DGA, like they want their people to be working, and they want to help support that. They also want to make sure that there's safety. And so if it feels like on the ground, smart decisions are being made to protect that, then, you know, but I mean, I am talking about very simple conditions. This is not, again, like talking about, you know, a set of 100 people, and how everybody's going to be cordoned off separately, and what the protocol is going to be. I have a question for you, David. So my producer head goes to, if you're having to finish Chad, do you have to work with the same budget? Hang on. Can you have her be quiet?
People disappear on Zoom. I could never.
Sorry, dog barking.
Yeah, I mean, that thought occurred to me almost immediately too. I think there's a sort of a widespread consensus among the networks and studios that whatever we're doing, if it's the social distancing world, whether it's the, you know, summer camp model, if it's rapid testing and social distancing, if it's modular or sectional shooting, that's going to be a drag on productivity. And I think most people are in agreement that we're talking about somewhere between a 20% and a 25% loss of productivity to get the same number of pages shot, script pages shot.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So I think there's going to be some allowances, but I'd also remind everybody that the models that we're working with to produce television shows are really ancient. I mean, most of these agreements were negotiated when there were 3 networks only, and they've been modified to deal with cable television and now to deal with streaming television. But there's never really been a confrontation with how we're making television now versus, you know, when those agreements were really reached. So and certain of the networks, I think, are really in a tight spot. Like if you're a cable channel like FX or IFC or Comedy Central, your money's coming partially from advertising dollars, the commercials that play during it, the retransmission fees, meaning the amount of money, some portion of the amount of money we're paying for our cable bill gets cut off and sent to that network to help them make the shows. Well, we're hearing that ads are way down, like maybe as much as 40% down. So that's a 40% loss there. People are already cutting the cable for networks like IFC that I produced the show documentary now for. They were already feeling the pinch. So the post-pandemic world of what they can afford to create is a real question mark, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say very similar things carry over for commercial production. It's based on a very old model. It's paid media, paid media, mostly in film, that's mostly means a TV spot. There's still, when you remove, I mean, these are things that have been coming for a long time, and this disruption is just accelerating some of those changes. And I think some new behaviors will be forced to be adopted. But mostly the best way to reach a broad audience on TV is only through a live sporting event. So until live sporting events like the Olympics and the NBA is back on, and or NFL, if that launches, it's going to be really hard to justify the same model end to end, and part of that is how it's funded. Even things that impact the production, like in the guidelines, when you look at some of the early guidelines in different even countries, how they're approaching production, some of anything commercial related is all based on, I mean, when you pull back from 30,000 feet, it's not necessarily as much logistics on running a safe set. It feels like it's written to an agency, an agency or a client, because most of the things are written around how Video Village is going to run, and the experience of like the client on set, which is so like ancillary. I mean, not to the clients, of course, but so ancillary to how the work is actually being made. So it's just interesting to see, like, I've read a couple, and it's kind of like, yeah, that's not like in a year that is going to be also irrelevant, because I don't think the days of the agency boondoggle to Hawaii to supervise a shoot is going to continue. They'll be supervising remotely. I mean, for that matter, maybe the director won't even go there,
Yeah, I think, and Devin actually just said this, Devin, you read my mind. There is a certain amount of opportunity here too, because we have the old model that goes back to the 50s and the 40s, as David pointed out. And we have this new terrain now of streaming and short form and online and all that stuff. And now we have something that is forced remote production, forced, nimbleism, forced independence. And so I think there is an opportunity here for small scale, highly creative, very quick and rapid content to come out of this in some form. The question is going to be, how does that get financed and how does that get distributed? And I don't think that's been sorted out quite yet. To Devin's point, I think the old model is being disrupted and there's opportunity, but we're at the bottleneck right now, where we're not sure what's going to be financed or what's going to be put out there or how it's going to be put out there. But I do believe that's coming, because we're all going to have to shift into how we make things, how we think about things, and what that content physically is. We know how people are going to consume it, but it's now going to change. You're going to see a whole bunch of TV shows now, probably for the next 6 months to a year, where actors aren't getting close to each other, and these things are going to have like 3 locations in each episode, and you're going to have to figure that out as a creator. So Amy, I'm conscious that we've come past the sort of 4:25 mark, and I know you wanted to sort of open it up to,
and you're in trouble,
to other things.
too.
I know, I'm really sorry. Moving it around, but I was enjoying it, so there you go.
Oh,
so
it's fantastic.
I know we want to open up on that.
Great. So it looks like there's already a question from the lovely Jen Tate. Is there a plan that might be recommended to indie filmmakers, and I'll say content creators, for what they might do to put themselves in a better position to get freelance work in this new world? I would also say, if you all have answers to that is both for fiction and nonfiction storytelling. We've spent a lot of time on certainly the fiction side of things, which is super important, but I will say that nonfiction storytelling, the buyers are looking and the buyers are buying. I can tell you that from my own experience. But if you all know more, we'd love to hear some ideas about how people should be thinking about getting back out there.
Well, I mean, I'll jump in. I have some thoughts on that. I have no published plan, but I would say, so some of this disruption that Devin talks about, this has been a long time coming. It's just that some of the legacy barriers and legacy, power structure, infrastructure were still very stable and solid, even though they had faulty business plans or maybe unsustainable business practices. So this may accelerate them to either adapt or they will no longer be barriers. So I think that this disruption will remove some of the barriers that maybe an indie or startup or somebody without a lot of that didn't come up within that system might not have access to those opportunities. As far as a plan, leverage all of the media, put the stuff out there. To David's point, there used to be 3 networks. It was so hard to get your stuff in a broad audience. Learn to tell the story, hack the mediums, the media, I hate to sound trite, the medium is the message. Learn where people are. Advertisers, I can speak from a commercial standpoint, advertisers are following their consumers, so as long as you can create things that are relevant, and the more that you do it and the more you monitor what your hit rates are, what your how to tell a story in an effective way that is authentic to a certain audience, then the employers, the people the people buying the work will find you.
Yeah, I'm not expecting in the longer form mediums, I'm not expecting rapid change. I think that even though there's been a tremendous change in the way we consume that material, I did a show many years ago for Netflix called Lady Dynamite. I produced a portion of that series. And one thing that struck me about that show was I'd worked for a lot of studios and a lot of networks at that point. And when I went to work on that show, it was sort of the promised land. They were like paying the most for content, and they're doing the most edgy content. And I was very excited to go work for them. And then when I got there, I got my production manual, which looked the same as the Sony production manual or the Warner Brothers production manual or the ABC production manual. And they were every bit as bureaucratic, and they had to follow the same rules in relation to the Screen Actors Guild and the Directors Guild of America and the Teamsters as everybody else. And basically, it wasn't any different working for Sony than it was for Netflix. So, it just always struck me as ironic, this company that had disrupted this entire industry, when they started creating content exactly the same way that everybody else in the industry had created it. And those companies still exist. And, there used to be this sort of more ready model of how to, jumpstart your career in the entertainment industry, the indie film, the film festival circuit, the indie film world. But I do think that Patty's exactly right, which is that maybe even a better model now about how to get the work out there is to monetize your work in different ways. And I think that advertising and storytelling, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, in that way, that's a really great model, which still exists, which is that you do projects that you think are stories you want to tell. And then in between that, if you can find clients who are willing to pay you to do their stories, hone your craft doing those stories the way they want them told in the medium that they want them told, you'll only get better at telling stories, and you'll only get better at telling your stories. So when the time comes, you'll be ready. So I do think looking at these different channels to monetize, these different ways to monetize your career as a storyteller is really only to the good.
I'm glad you brought that up. This kind of goes to, sorry, Patty, goes to this point that Amy actually has been talking about a lot, which is the crossover of mediums, that there's the silos of this is going to be a series television or this is going to be a feature film in theaters. That is all kind of breaking down right now because there's no theaters to show it in, and Universal and AMC are fighting with each other. So that's not going to happen. So suddenly you have multiple platforms, and I'm wondering whether or not, because traditional advertising now with sports not being around is suddenly taking a nosedive. The series television is there's not really anything network anymore. It's all about streaming because that's what people are consuming, and even the networks are going on to streaming. So now you have this thing about, what is your story? Is it 6 episodes? Is it 4? Is it a podcast? Is it an experience? Is it a music thing? How is it being told? And I think that's another big opportunity, because I think people are now ready to consume in multiple formats.
And I think what makes you unique, I think there's no time better spent than your own story and your own brand. I've shared with you all that, I've been working on a feature doc that was lucky enough actually this week to win the grand jury prize at Tribeca. But I think what he did that was brilliant was that he was 110% him. And when people asked him, why are you unique? Why is your story unique? And what do you bring to the table? Some people were out to kind of like see his film and it's for some, it's not for all, it's experimental, it's weird. But he had great answers to those questions. And so that actually is leading potentially to a job with ESPN for 30 for 30. And we tease him where we're like, are you going to do baton twirling? Like, this is a guy that doesn't even like sports, right? But like he brings something so unique to the table and is able to articulate that as a storyteller in a way that's going to maybe bring him opportunities that either he might not have been, open to before, or that others might not have been open to before. He's not the jock. He's not the guy that's going to talk to you about football, but he's got a point of view and a voice. And now people are kind of looking at that of saying, okay, this is a person with a point of view and a voice, and how can I adapt that to the channels or the advertorial or the even sports that I have? Because right now people are looking for something new. So just throwing that out there. There's a bunch of flurry of questions, so this is good. Let's start with Paul. He said the challenge for indie filmmakers getting product placement is that buyers require indie producers can demonstrate that they have a large audience. Without some sort of track record demonstrating a large audience, the product buyers aren't interested in indie film. I'd love to hear from you, Patty. I also say, in this day and age, because we have YouTube, which even, the mighty Tribeca is putting on a film festival with, all the way through all sorts of other channels, there are ways. And, I know there's some filmmakers right now that are on this call that are releasing films this month, or have released films, in the last month, that they're having to track their audiences in different ways. So I'd love to hear from Patty and anybody that really can speak to that, because I think we all now are monitoring our own audiences.
Well, I would say just like purely from, I'll come at it from a brand or commercial perspective, they're just looking for audiences. So if yes, a buyer is going to want to see whether that buyer is a brand that wants to co-opt the message or somehow take your voice and your story and think it's relevant to their brand and repurpose it somehow, or, create another iteration of that. They're just going to want to see that you resonate with a particular group or demographic that also aligns with their customer base. And that's going to be the same for, whether it's a streamer or a cable network that is funded by advertising. I mean, some streamers are funded by advertising, Hulu. They're going to want to see that this content, resonates with whatever, women 18 to 20, or, I don't know, the skate crowd, because that's the kind of audience that they're looking for. So I think that it still is, that's why I would say like self-publish and get your work out there. And then I think that, I think Amy, one of the things like to kind of carry your narrative thread, think of, this is always what I'm telling like our teams, think of story. Don't think so much of the actual medium, like this is a podcast versus this is an album or a theatrical performance. Think of like a holistic 360 story and a really interesting way to tell a story, because people love stories. And there are so many, and so if people love stories, then brands or studios or some buyer is going to want that story, because that's where the people are. That's how to get it funded. And people are becoming so much more sophisticated in what kind of story they will listen to. And I think that like, at least from a commercial perspective, is really changing the very nature of commercials, and commercials will be forced. Advertising is not going away. It's just going to feel very, very different. And it will therefore need to bring some type of value. Either you need to escape and be entertained, or there's utility. There's, you know, you mentioned advertorial things that are, and this is primarily in the nonfiction world. Like if you are a sports brand, how can you give like actual good, credible tips around sports for your consumer, you know, without just it boiling down to you kind of like hawking your product. So.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure. Hi, Paul.
Hey, hi. So, so to follow up with you, Patty. So, all right, I've made 11 feature films, and I've talked to product placement agents in LA, and the reality is that my indie films are truly indie unique, and they don't appeal to what major buyers are interested in supporting. So, is there another way to find corporate funding for fictional indie films other than going through the traditional product placement channels?
Probably, yeah, the traditional product, I mean, sometimes those can be good, sometimes those can't. I would say like if you could identify a corporation, like many, I mean, you know, I'm kind of like winging it here. This might not work for everything. I don't know. I'm not familiar with your film, so I'm not sure if this is the kind of thing, but like many corporations have like a corporate responsibility or a social justice division that is truly, you know, truly dedicated to doing good in the world. So if you have a film that is related to, I don't know, water supply in Africa or building schools or something in, you know, poor regions, that might be a way because it's adjacent. They're trying to have that message. Or more obvious, if you have something that is an inspirational story, you know, about female empowerment, that might be appropriate for Dove. And that wouldn't necessarily be product placement. That would be more like sponsorship. But I'll go back to like, if you're looking for funding through a brand, the best way to do that is know that brand's consumer base and show up in those places. So I'll use my skateboard. If you make skateboard, if you specialize in skateboard films, then that might be interesting to Vans or Converse or, you know, like a traditional like skate type brand. Yeah. Does that help?
Paul, I'll just say
Yes,
quickly
yeah.
and jump in. If you know that's not the traditional way, the indie way, I've seen more and more at things like IFP Market, Film Independent Market, Tribeca, Austin Film Society, all these places that kind of hold markets for people that have new work that are looking to fund it either traditionally or non-traditionally, that there are more branded content folks and advertising folks there now than there have ever been. I'd say in the last 2 years, that was a weird and wonderfully welcome trend that we were seeing, because it usually was like all of the studios, all of the sales agents, all of the, you know, indie and traditional agencies and, you know, those kind of folks, but everybody's getting into that game. So I would say the next one coming up is the IFP Market in September. And by every account, they're going to continue to do it online. And, you know, it's worth putting your hat in the ring for, because I think that they do a really good job of trying to bring a much broader base of potential funders to the table than they used to. And that's for doc and for narrative. So just as a heads up that that's a trend.
You're right. That is a really good shout. I hadn't even thought about that, because I'm aware of that because I've been to those festivals. I've also been like hit up by those people. They're almost like a different kind of sales agent. They are actively pitching to brands, and they also have various programs too that are mostly related around issues. So if you could somehow tie it to an issue or tie it to an audience, that helps them. And you know, as you know, Amy and Tim, many brands or many people from like an advertising background are teaming with different distributors to help brands and agencies kind of like shepherd, you know, a film to align with like a campaign.
The last one I'll say, thank you, Patty, is also for everyone, and maybe you already saw the news. So the Blacklist, which is run by Franklin Leonard out of LA and is a really amazing organization that does everything from give notes on projects that people have to having different contests and affiliations where people can submit their work. It has a number of kind of Hollywood and indie followers, and that's a place where people see work. They just launched an initiative now with really a focus on Latinx artists and filmmakers. And the folks at Hulu are giving away 2 blind deals, production deals, to the winning projects. So I know that sounds like a contest, and we're all too old for contests and the lottery, but I would just say watch, because if they're doing that now, others will probably follow. So that's just another place with the blacklist that I would look into for everyone. And I'm looking into what this new initiative is and if it's a success. So. I think we had one more question from the prolific Devin. Do you all see that the Fortune 500 companies in the future will, even in the immediate future, will be moving away from kind of their traditional high-end commercials in order to save money or in order to be sensitive to this moment? And what does that mean for the agencies that they may have to look to clients or to more homegrown talent in order to be able to pull those off, or not?
I don't think they will ever move away from their traditional high-end content creation, as long as they have the money to spend. It will not be in paid interruptive advertising, or if it's interruptive, it will just be in a different situation that if I had a crystal ball, I could predict, knowing some of the restrictions. But telling a story effectively, and telling a story effectively isn't always necessarily tied to production value. As we all know, some of our probably most favorite content has had low budgets. But there will always be a need for a certain level of craft and acumen in telling the story. And the really good brands, the big companies that are effective communicators, will absolutely tap the people who are most expert and can most authentically tell that story. Now, again, like I'll go back to some of the social examples. Doing a disposable Mother's Day post, or doing an exercise video is a very different production value, but there is a level of expertise that is needed to do that. Steven Spielberg would probably not make a good exercise video or training video, or like a product demo. So I think that there's room for all kinds of different content, and brands they are just hungry for it like the rest of the world. There is no shortage of places to put it and ways that you can reach people that are, go from very broad, which is the more high end, to narrow. And I think you'll see, David, I'd be curious to know what you think. I think you'll see a lot more brands, especially, entertainment type brands, like maybe gamers, gaming companies, creating more traditional content, or like branch narrative content.
Yeah, I do think so. But also, I think that when I'm doing an indie, I think less about the size of my total audience than I do about the enthusiasm of them. That's really the hat trick for any production. Is the hardest thing to do is to find the audience. So it's not that you have to be big to get an endorsement deal or a sponsorship deal or a product placement deal. If you're smaller, you need to really connect with a rabid following. So I also think, besides those big LA, I'm sorry to be jumping back to answer an old question, but besides those big LA agencies, Los Angeles-based agencies that do brand and product placement, you can do your own. Like, if you know your audience, it's not hard to pick up the phone and call the marketing division or the public relations division of some company and say, I think your customer would really connect with this story I'm making. And I've had pretty good success myself getting product placement and sponsorship just by understanding the audience well.
For those of you who attended PIF this year, The Climb, which was one of the 4 features that was in the festival, they actually had reached out randomly to Speedwagon. What a cool name for a bike company. But I went to find out with December that these are like $14,000 bikes. I don't know. Maybe they give you a massage. I don't know what they do, but they called them and they sponsored all of the things that they needed for the film, and it was like product placement fandango. So I think that that's just an example of somebody that's making a first feature film that's calling people out of the blue and making it work. So just as a heads up for that. We have one more question. It's from Anna. People are probably aware of all the plays that are streaming right now, but if any of the producers here started with an equity contract for stage, shot that production, and subsequently gone through contract processes to allow for streaming? I think that's a really interesting question because obviously, our friends at Literary Arts, a lot of the other theater companies that are here in Oregon, including the Shakespeare Theater program, they're all going online. And, we're all writers, we're all creatives, we're all producers, we're all trying to be as nimble as possible. But if anybody has experience with that, it would be interesting to hear. Yeah, it's an important question, but I don't know that anybody's there yet.
No, I think that the short answer is going to be what rights are granted to the person that are shooting it, and that's just going to be a contractual thing. So there's going to be stage rights, there's going to be TV rights, there's going to be streaming rights, there's going to be feature film rights. All of those are going to be bifurcated in some sort of contract for whoever it is that's recording it. So I think with the Oregon Shakespeare Company, which is doing the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, is doing this. I think they're Shakespeare stuff, so it's not going to matter from the author point of view. So their contract's going to track to the actor, so the actor's okay with it being in a video medium rather than just a stage medium, and that's probably in their personnel agreements. So it's going to be a contract to contract kind of question, I think, on that. Amy, I think Bruce Carter, did you want to say something? I know you had put a message in there. You wanted to speak to production models.
Yeah, please. Thank you. I'm Bruce Carter, and I'm kind of a Zoom neophyte, so I didn't realize how to type into the chat. I'm also a pandemic neophyte. But I did want to speak to, I'm in the same boat somewhat that David is. My show got canceled about a week before shooting. And then I spent the next 3 or 4 weeks mothballing it. But I do want to speak to David's point about the contracts and so forth, sort of being set, starting their framework, if you will, in the 30s or whenever it was and moving on. I do think that we're going to see some changes in how, and by the way, there's been a lot of discussion about how to artistically get your content out there. I'm speaking primarily of the rank and file, the below the line folks, and how they're going to work on a set moving forward. And I think we're going to see changes that are as great as we have seen in this industry. Film going to digital will be a drop in the bucket compared to what we're going to see. And I think there'll be some initial formative stuff that's going to be just that, very formative. I see a schism forming between union and sort of non-union work, perhaps, or work that may not be as carefully watched over, because I do think, to speak to, I think it was Patty's point, I do think that at least at the outset, that the expense, and I've been reading these various articles about what Hollywood's going to look like, Hollywood production, the expense is going to shock a lot of people. And, David speaks to losing 20 to 25% of your production on a given day's shooting. Well, then that's just exacerbating your time problems. You're probably going to have to shoot for 9 hours, let's say, or 10 hours, and have disinfection before and disinfection after, and follow that through. And your nurse is going to have plenty of testing, and you're going to have to test twice a week. I'm making these numbers up. However, as this whole thing, we're now being forced to form this conceit of how we're going to shoot this. We're having to do it on the fly. And to do it on the fly with a small project is one thing. To do it on the fly with David's show or NBC or whatever is pretty difficult, because you're dragging along with you a lot of resources that you may not need. I mean, we all know that these pilots come along and the above the line can be 40% of your budget, 30 to 40% of your budget. That's not going to be able to continue, to my eye, because that money, certainly with shows that come to Portland, Grimm aside, that money really leaves you with a below the line that's really pretty skinny. You don't have a lot of money to do much of anything else below the line. Where's this money going to come from? You're either going to have the creatives taking a smaller slice, or it's just simply going to be more expensive to make product moving forward. And how are we going to remedy that?
I don't think we can answer that, unfortunately. I know we talked about this last night, but I don't think we can answer that. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be this holdover of projects that were before COVID, and small and large, and they're going to have expectations on a budget that is going to be X, Y, and Z. And then COVID's going to come and it's going to change budgetary as well as creative expectations. And projects are either going to adapt to that, and studios are going to either adapt it or they're not. And those projects will go away or not be done or not get finished in the right way. And then going forward, they're going to have new things that are going to adapt to this. And you're absolutely right. There's going to be a cost. There's going to be shorter work days. There's going to be a whole bunch of health and safety things that are going on. And that's just the way it is. So people are going to have to adapt to that, and studios and producers included. I think we're reaching the end of time here. Amy, did you want to do a wrap up on this? But thank you, Bruce.
Yeah.
It's very important. And I don't mean to dismiss it, but it's a big question that I don't know that we have the time to dig into right now. But I throw it back to you, Amy.
Sure. So I was really excited because I'm seeing a lot of new faces. People are dropping off. There's 18th birthday parties and real drinks and all sorts of things. But I was really encouraged to see so many new faces today. So I would challenge all of you to invite a friend. And maybe they're local, maybe they're up in Seattle, maybe they're in Atlanta. We want to mix this up a little bit and make sure that it's still relevant and exciting in the weeks to come. And if it doesn't change at all, I'm still thrilled. But I think we should just open the doors a little wider and see who might want to join us. And so send folks either my way, Tim's way, December's way, and we'll get them all hooked up, and we'll share soon what some of the topics are. We're going to do, as I mentioned, some stuff around new media, around animation, around distribution, around sales, some things that you all have sent. So just a huge thank you to Patty and to David. You are both so generous to share and to spend this time with us. So thank you. We hope this won't be the last of you. Hope it's not a cameo. And then some of you might have also noticed the shiny, shiny disco ball behind my head. That my 10-year-old was actually in charge of my Zoom background. And he knows that on May 8th, we're going to be doing a screening of Starship Earth, which is Matt Wolf's feature doc about a group of folks that was quarantined inside a biosphere in 1991 and how they fared. It's being presented by our friends at Neon. So for those of you who are not film nerds on the call, they're the ones that have distributed Parasite and Portrait of a Lady on Fire and I, Tonya. They're really innovative. And they've come up with a model where they are asking folks to support their local museums and their local art and cultural institutions. So the ticket sales, we're going to do a week release. And so the ticket sales will go on sale May 8th. And if you feel like a great movie, and especially if you feel like a great movie supporting us, that would be terrific. And we will hopefully see you for some conversation next week with more details, but just wanted to share that as well. It's going to be quite a movie if you haven't seen it, but thank you to everybody. It's great to see your faces. It's great to see new faces as well. And keep sending ideas about what you'd like to see and who you'd like to hear from, and we'll do our best to facilitate. And thanks, Tim. I'm sorry I bum rushed you with being the leader today, but you were.
No, you're good. You're good. John Goodwin had something to say. John, did you say?
Yeah.
Great. Hi, John.
Hi, Amy. I just wanted to say one thing really quickly. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Tribeca Award?
Oh goodness! Speaking of bum rush, now it's karmic, Tim. No, I'm not like that. But
no, we'd all love to hear. Definitely tell us.
So it's a film by Alabama filmmaker Bo McGuire, and it's called Socks on Fire. And as he likes to say, he is the son of a Waffle House cook and of his fourth shift waitress. And it's a love letter to his family and his community down in Alabama. as well as a bit of a Southern Gothic tale about growing up queer and what happens when your homophobic aunt goes after your drag queen uncle. So it will be in theaters and online and all that good stuff eventually, but there's a beautiful, for anybody interested at this moment, there's a beautiful article in Talkhouse, talkhouse.com, that really talks and is very inspiring, and not just because I'm producing the film, about willful creativity at this moment and making things out of what you have and the people you love and the place you come from, that I found to be very inspiring. And maybe I was just COVID emotional, but there was a little tear in my beer from reading it. So
Yeah.
John, thank you for
thank you.
asking, and hopefully that wasn't too indulgent.
And
No, that's
congratulations.
that's the one we talked about when we were down in LA. And being a Southerner, I know all of those characters really, really well. I look forward to seeing it.
Thank you.
Hi, Mary.
Cool beans. Well, thanks, David. Thanks, Patty. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, December. Thanks, everybody, for being here. There's more of these to come, and I'm happy to feel like we're now making constructive conversation and hopefully being helpful to everybody. So thanks for putting it together. Thanks for being here. Have a great weekend. See you later.
Bye. Thank you.